I'll take it back! All of it!
Leif is one of the most useful characters in the game, but for more subtle reasons than some lords. He's not a combat juggernaut, but more of a support unit. Literally, as he supports an enormous amount of the cast. Supports in Thracia give a bonus to accuracy, avoid, critical, and critical avoid of usually 10% to characters within a 3-tile radius. They're entirely fixed in Thracia. Characters will never gain new support partners or increase their bonds with existing ones. They can also be one way. For example, while Leif provides a 10% bonus to all those listed characters, he only gets a 10% bonus in return from Nanna. Leif and Nanna is one of the only neutral supports in the game, and is quite a good one. Leif can provide an additional accuracy and avoid bonus to the army via his leadership or authority stars. I prefer the term leadership, but Radiant Dawn officially localizes it as authority, so I had to call it that. Every authority star across all units deployed provides a 3% accuracy and evasion boost to your entire army. But Leif is unique in that the number of stars he has depends on the plot. Every advisor he has present adds a star. Right now he has 0, but that will change, and when it does, it's yet more utility for him. But authority isn't the only type of star a Thracia character can have on their profile, as Leif has one Vigor star. Each star gives a character a 5% chance to act again after ending their turn. Yes, this is a mechanic in Thracia, and it's hilarious. And in the same category of weird Thracia mechanics is Leif's FCM, or follow-up critical multiplier, of 2. So, crits are a little weird in Thracia. Your first attack in any given combat is capped at a critical rate of 25%. But if you have enough speed to attack again, that's 4 more than the enemy, your second attack's critical rate is multiplied by your character's unique FCM value. TLDR, Leif gets a double critical rate on his follow-up attacks, which makes his combat a lot better than it looks on paper. What also does this is his personal weapon, the Light Brand. Thracia loves these, so much that I've included them in the unit bios because they form a good part of many units' identities. For Leif, the Light Brand is a fairly strong sword that has 1 to 2 range, but when used at 2 range it deals magic damage. While Leif starts with a magic stat of 0, this is still great as it bypasses the defense of enemies, but especially terrain. Thracia has terrain giving defense bonuses of up to +10, so ignoring that's a very big deal, especially when most bosses sit on these tiles. It also gives +10 luck and can be used to recover all HP, giving Leif some deceptive durability if you're willing to give up his action. This does consume a use of the weapon, but it has a very generous 60, and you get access to a repair staff early. The Light Brand isn't a bad choice for it. Leif also has the Adept skill, giving him an attack speed % chance of attacking again, like a Brave weapon. This is unreliable early, especially since the Light Brand will drop his attack speed to 0, more on that later, but it's another thing giving Leif better combat than his stats suggest. Oh right, I haven't even covered his stats yet. This is actually quite fitting of Thracia. Most units are defined by their special innate abilities, skills, or personal weapons, than their stats alone. But let's cover them. HP affects your ability to not die, strength is your physical damage, skill affects accuracy and critical rate, speed affects evasion and your ability to double attack, luck affects accuracy and evasion to a much greater extent than it does in most Fire Emblems, and critical evasion to a much lesser extent than normal, and movement is how many squares you can go in a turn. Now you might notice that I haven't mentioned 2 stats. Well, firstly, where's resistance? Thracia operates on Pokemon Gen 1 special stat logic. Magic affects both your magic damage and your magic defense. While Constitution, or Build, was a stat introduced in Thracia and is an incredibly important one. Firstly, you lose 1 point of speed for every point of weight your weapon exceeds your build stat by. Perhaps more importantly though, if your con is higher than a unit, you can rescue them if they're an ally, or capture them if they're an enemy. Mounted units count as having 20 con for this purpose, which by the way, is the cap on all stats in Thracia. Regardless of if you're ally or enemy, promoted or unpromoted, all stats only go up to 20. Here Leif's starting con is a bit of a weakness, as it's not enough to do good capturing off the bat. But his 15% growth in it is actually about average, and speaking of which, I've put growths off to the side in these bios because they're not that important, both due to Thracia's lower caps, and because there are a lot of items that modify them. But among these, Leif's strength growth of 35% is above average, and that really says something about this game. And especially above average is his 3% growth in Yes, you might have been wondering about that. Characters can level up movement in Thracia. Yes, it's hilarious, and you will know when it happens. And given Leif is force deployed in every map, and does a lot of fighting in the first arc for reasons, it's actually pretty likely for him to level movement at least once. The force deployment means Leif is also the one character immune to Thracia's fatigue mechanic, which is another major asset he has, but fatigue doesn't come into play until chapter 8, so I'll explain more later. Overall, Leif perfectly sums up Thracia unit philosophy. He might not look obviously strong, but he has a lot of special assets that make him one of the most useful characters. That also perfectly sums up his emblem in Engage. It's almost like its makers really knew their Fire Emblem.
One day, we will take back our realm, as long as Lord Leif lives.
Finn is our first, and for a while, only mounted unit. I alluded to this when talking about Leif, but mounted units are very important in Thracia because they count as having maxed out con when capturing and rescuing. This also means that they themselves cannot be captured unless forced to dismount somehow. Oh yeah, dismounting is a thing in Thracia, and it also forms a key part of the mounted unit identity. Mounted units must dismount manually in order to enter indoor terrain, and they'll start this way in entirely indoor maps. When dismounted, the unit loses some stats. I've shown the stats bestowed by the mount in lighter bars. And for some classes, they're forced to swap weapons. This is a big detriment in Finn's case, as he cannot use lances while dismounted, switching to swords, which he starts with a D rank in. And this is particularly bad for Finn because the best thing about him is his exclusive weapon, the Brave Lance. There are brave weapons of other types, but the Brave Lance is his alone, and it helps amazingly when capturing, guaranteeing you at least 2 attacks, while also having solid stats, and plus 10 luck. Speaking of luck, this also fuels Finn's Miracle skill, which is quite strong in Thracia. It has a luck times 3% chance of triggering, which means at capped luck you've got a 60% chance. Which is pretty good given that, unlike other Fire Emblem games, this doesn't just protect you from one hit. If this triggers, you cannot die for the rest of the combat. All incoming attacks will be rigged to miss if they would otherwise kill you. I'm not actually sure if the Brave Lance's plus 10 affects this skill, but if it does, that gives Finn a maximum 90% miracle chance, which is pretty insane. Getting a support bonus from Leif and Nanna, 2 of the best utility characters in the game, is also nothing to sneeze at. Especially since it stacks with one of Nanna's skills. Finn may not have a follow critical modifier or vigor stars, but he does have one authority star. This means that even in indoor maps where he's not that useful, he can be worth deploying if you have a free slot for the authority star alone. Finn's growths are fairly average all round apart from a solid luck growth, and his base stats are great for the early game, letting him 1 round most things when not capturing, and 1 round a decent number of things with his Brave Lance when capturing. And with his combat being so good early on, it's easy to forget that Finn is not a pre-promote. Lance Knight is a first tier class that can promote to Duke Knight with a Master Seal at level 10. This can give Finn a boost if you want to use him long term, but in my experience, once his Brave Lance starts to run low on uses, Finn's generally past his prime. He is, however, absolutely excellent for the early game, and a key part of getting a lot of captures, so I'd highly recommend using him a lot at that point. But even later, don't forget his Authority Star.
I fear no enemy.
It's not often you see a Swordmaster Jagan, and I think it's a pretty cool concept. Eyvel has nearly capped skill and actually capped speed at base, a maxed sword rank, and the Adept skill, meaning she's likely to tear apart anything she gets into combat with. She also has slightly higher starting movement than the average promoted foot units, being equal to unpromoted mounted units, so she has no trouble keeping up with your army. Plus a 10% chance of moving twice due to her Vigor Stars. She also starts with the Flame Sword. Think of this like the Light Brand, except people besides Leif can use it, but it gives its wielder plus 10 magic, making it consistently strong even in the hands of a non-mage. This is one of your answers to armored units in the early game. The only problem is you might want to save this for a bit later, as troubadours can make very good use of it to buff up their staff casting. Eyvel isn't just an excellent fighter though, she's also a great support unit, having 1 Authority Star and giving a 10% support bonus to many of the early game units like Osian, Halvan, and Dagdar, along with receiving support bonuses from Leif. And there's also the elephant in the room. Eyvel is literally unkillable. This is something the game doesn't tell you unless you turn on hidden data in the fan patches, but she has a hidden skill that makes any attack that would otherwise kill her always miss. It's effectively miracle active constantly. But note my specific wording. I said Eyvel is literally unkillable, and this is true. But she can still be captured. The odds of this happening are very, very low, but if it does, you won't lose her permanently unless you let the enemy walk off the map while carrying her. Still, it's something to keep in mind. Besides this highly specific thing, Eyvel does have some other weaknesses. Her growths are terrible, but she doesn't need them. Her real weakness is she's not great at capturing due to her middling con. It's enough to capture some lighter enemies like archers, but any bandits or even most soldiers are above her. Eyvel is something you throw at a problem you want dead, not captured. And solving too many problems this way in the early game will set you back. This mentality with Jagans is typically a beginner's trap, but it is true of Eyvel, so keep it in mind.
Eyvel says I rile too easy. I'm not gonna prove her right by yelling at her about it though.
I finally get to talk about the ultimate axe, bro! I still liked it better when he was called Osian in Awakening, but oh well. Osian is, off the bat, pretty decent. He's got solid speed, okay strength, enough con not to be weighed down by several axes, though a little lower than you'd want for capturing. Okay growths in strength and speed that can easily be fixed by items we get later, a 3 times follow-up critical modifier, which he doesn't even need on the enemy phase since Wrath ensures that he always crits on counterattacks. He gets a support bonus from Eyvel and has a rare mutual support in Tanya, which is not great due to things I'll be saying later. But all of that pales in comparison to his personal weapon. It is known by many names: Boogie, Bougie, Vouge, but all of them are destruction. This is a 60 use, high accuracy, 1 to 2 range axe with a 30 critical rates, and given his follow critical modifier, he will generally always crit with this at least once per combat. He may not be mounted, he may not be great at capturing, but Osian is an absolute powerhouse entirely due to this weapon. And you can either repair it with the repair staff you get early, or obtain another one towards the end of the game. So he can keep it up for a long time. He can promote to hero at level 10, which gives him access to swords, but why would he want to use them? and a solid +3 to speed and defense. I'm struggling to think about what else to say about this guy. He's just really good, thanks to one really good axe. Be absolutely sure you get it in the first chapter by having him visit his dad's house. Halvan, the very definition of overshadowed by awesome. If Osian didn't exist, this guy would be pretty great. He's got some good bases, and 1 point more con than Osian at base is actually pretty decent because it lets him capture a few key early enemies. He also has a 40% strength growth, which is pretty high for Thracia standards, and a 4 times follow-up critical modifier. The problem is he lacks 2 of the things that Osian has. Firstly, Vantage I don't find as good as Wrath on its own. It really needs specific weapon types or other skills to combo with, and Halvan doesn't have any of them. But more importantly, he doesn't have the Vouge. Now, Halvan is required to get the Brave Axe, but anybody can use it once you have it, even Osian. If the Brave Axe was exclusive to Halvan, he might have actually been a very solid unit and usable alongside the fellow Axe Bro. But it's not. Halvan is by no means bad. You'll probably rely on him for a lot of fighting in the early game, even if you don't plan on taking him all the way, and he's not a terrible training project either. It really is just him versus the guy you're told not to be afraid of. All hail the almighty king of capturing! I'm now picturing Dagdar as a professional wrestler with that title, and it makes way too much sense. Anyway, Dagdar is essentially the second Jagan you get, and as you can tell, they're both pretty unconventional. Dagdar is a warrior, able to use axes and bows. He's also very tanky at base, having high HP and among the best defense of your starting army, along with not bad speed and enough con that he's only weighed down by 3 axes, one of them being the hammer he starts with. But the con is the real asset. Dagdar is able to capture nearly everything in the early game, even though he's not mounted. And this gets you a lot of weapons and or money. And he's doubly great at capturing thanks to the accost skill. If Dagdar has more HP and attack speed than the enemy, you'll fight a second round of combat, letting him potentially attack 4 times if he had a speed lead of 4, or 8 times with a brave weapon and a speed lead of 4. However, the enemy will get extra attacks on him, and this skill is a bit of a double-edged sword because it still triggers even if Dagdar can't counterattack. Watch out for 2-range enemies when he's using a melee axe, and especially long-range tomes and ballistas, though many like using this to waste enemy ballista ammo. But this double-edged sword can work in your favour if you have Dagdar use a bow against an enemy with only 1 range. Just remember you can't capture this way. Dagdar's growths are terrible, but there exist items that can fix this, and many players say Dagdar is endgame viable on his base stats alone. His capturing skills make him a walking weapons factory that'll be invaluable through the entire game. MARTY is the very definition of a meme unit. Yes, you are reading those base stats right. 0 in skill and speed, and his growths in those stats are terrible too. In fact, all of his offensive growths suck, but he has overkill growths in HP, luck, defense, and con. And that's MARTY's whole gimmick. He's awful at fighting, but he's a giant slab of beef that can pick up anything he wants to. This, oddly, makes MARTY not a bad unit to have around, because he can pull the captured enemies off of other characters so they don't need to suffer the stat penalty on the enemy phase. And while he does that, he can then strip the enemy of its inventory. That's MARTY's lot in life, to be a sapient pack mule. That said, this game does have items that raise growth rates and stat boosters, so it's possible to make any character good, and unsurprisingly, MARTY is one of the most popular recipients of this, just because it's really funny. He does get a pretty insane +5 to skill and +6 to speed if he promotes though, and I recommend doing that as soon as possible because that's a big boost. He also gains access to bows, he promotes to warrior, the same class as Dagdar, and he's actually the only other warrior you have. Oh, by the way, yeah, MARTY was the first ever playable brigand in the series. Sorry, Gonzalez. But, yeah, absolute meme combat-wise, still a surprisingly useful utility unit. Don't forget about him.
Hey! Watch it! Pick on me and I'll make you regret it!
Thracia made some surprising strides in balancing, especially compared to the Fire Emblem games that came after it. Unfortunately, archers are still bad. In addition to all the usual problems of being bad on the enemy phase, they have the additional issue in Thracia of being completely unable to capture anything, as you can only capture in melee. And as the early game is very focused on capturing, as it's your only way to get weapons and money, Tanya doesn't really have much of a niche, except maybe to chip away at enemies so you can capture them more easily. She does have a good base speed and a very good speed growth, along with good luck, but she also has 3 base strength, 4 base con, meaning she's weighed down by every bow in the game by a minimum of 2 points, and a 2x follow critical multiplier, and supports with Dagdar and Osian that don't really help because she's either so pathetic her crits don't even kill things, or they do kill things and you don't want them to because then you can't capture. And starting at E rank bows doesn't do her any favours either. The main notable thing is having one of the only mutual supports in the game, and it is admittedly with a very good character, but each of the starting Fianna Freeblades has at least one notable early game niche, and Tanya doesn't. And she might have had one if you fought enemy flyers in the early chapters, but you don't, and you won't for quite some time. One strange strength she has is that in Chapter 8X, none of the enemies can kill her for the first 15 turns. If you really like Tanya and want to use her, I recommend exploiting this for training.
No chance I'll miss.
Ronan has 3 Vigor Stars, a 15% chance of acting twice in a turn. 1 more movement on the average for foot units. Adept, a weirdly high 55% magic growth for a physical unit. And that's about it. But all those things are just so weird that Ronan is a fan favourite character to train. Doing so is just easier said than done when he has a mediocre strength base and a 15% growth, 2 base defense and a 5% growth, and starts with an E in bows. Plus all the usual issues of archers, can't do much on the enemy phase, can't capture, blah blah blah. So Ronan's intended niche is a mage-killing archer who moves a lot, and sometimes attacks a lot too, but with his base magic of 0 it takes him a while to get to that level. He gets a support bonus from Leif though, and that's something. His starting con is also way less miserable than Tanya's, but he also has 3 base skill. And archer with 3 base skill. Ronan is weird, but many players like weird, and for them, he's the perfect guy. Can you imagine how much he'd love the Radiant Bow if that existed in Thracia? He can only dream.
My aid is yours.
Safy is Thracia's first staff user, and there's something you should know about staves in Thracia. They're broken. So it follows that Safy is also broken. But it's not all good news for staves in Thracia because they have one bit of jank. They can miss. Yes, this is a real mechanic. The chance of a staff hitting is 60 plus 4 times the character's skill. This means that once they reach 10 skill, a staff user will never miss. Until that point though, it's always a possibility, but Thracia fans will always be quick to tell you that missing with staves is not the worst thing in the world, because it doesn't consume a use and you still get staff experience. Speaking of which, staves are the exception to the 1 weapon experience per use rule. They give varying amounts of weapon experience, they also give varying amounts of fatigue, but that'll be relevant later. And Safy starts only 10 weapon experience away from B rank staves, and promoting her gives her a free plus 50 staff experience, another full rank. Warp staves are A ranked. They are full map range in Thracia, you get multiple of them, and the first comes in Chapter 7, and it is very possible to get Safy to A staves by then. But Safy is unique even among other staff users because she has a personal one, Hammern. Repairing a weapon or other staff to full uses is always amazing, but it's even better in Thracia because 1, you get it really early, and 2, there's a lot of amazing personal weapons to fix up. Alternatively, you can use it to repair warp and status staves to break the game even more. With all this going for her, Safy's stats don't really matter outside of skill until it hits 10, and HP for fatigue reasons. If you want, you can use Crusader Scrolls to improve her HP growth to make it less likely she'll need to sit out chapters later on. That said, staff fatigue isn't as bad as it looks in my opinion, because you don't need to deploy every staff user in every chapter, and Thracia gives you plenty of them to rotate out. Overall, Safy is great in Thracia entirely because staves are great, and so many people affectionately call her Staffy. Another warning about staff users in Thracia: until they promote, keep them far away from enemies, and once they do promote, make sure to give them a weapon even if you don't intend on fighting with them. Without a weapon, a single touch from an enemy will capture them, and that will lose you all their staves unless you can capture that enemy back.
Give me your gold, and I'll give you your life.
Lifis is the first potential thief you get in Thracia, and that's one of the reasons you want to go to this side quest. Because thieves, like many things in Thracia, are very interesting due to how stealing works. If your speed is higher than the enemy's, instead of simply taking an item, you initiate a trade with the enemy. Weapons, items, staves, there is only one limit on what you can take, and that's that the item's weight has to be less than the thief's con. And Lifis' base con of 6 means that most weapons are off limits for him. But magic tomes are quite light, and this gives him a really weird and hilarious niche. Lifis can turn enemy mages harmless just by walking up to them. And he will have many such victims in chapters 4 and 5. But if he wants to move on to bigger time thievery, Lifis needs to bulk up, which isn't likely on his bases because he only has a 10% con growth. There is one Crusader Scroll that gives a bonus to con growth though, and it may be worth your while giving it to him. But I should mention now, there is another thief you get later who has much higher base con and far better combat stats, so Lifis may not be the best at that job. Stealing, in air quotes, isn't just for taking things. You can also give the enemy one of your items, and there are strategies based on giving bosses detrimental weapons. Lifis' thief utility doesn't end there though, he can also use lockpicks. And it's easy to get more through capturing or stealing from enemy thieves. As Thracia is a game where you can literally get softlocked through lack of door keys, I probably don't need to tell you how useful this is. Besides thief utility though, Lifis doesn't offer much. His combat is terrible, and that's not just because his only good growth is speed. See that follow-up critical modifier? You are reading that right, that is a 0. This means when Lifis double attacks, his second hit can never critical. Unlike some early Fire Emblem games, thieves can promote in Thracia and they gain vantage, but I would not recommend using a Master Seal on Lifis. Just keep him to thief stuff, he doesn't deserve anything more. Machyua, or I kinda prefer Matcha, whatever you call her, she's okay. She's one of your first fighters during the Monster Escape arc, so you'll be using her at least a little here, whether you like it or not. Her base strength is a bit iffy, and Vantage doesn't help her that much, but a 3 times follow critical multiplier and a point where you can steal rapiers off enemies gives her some crit potential. If you want to use her long term, the main unique thing about Machyua is that she promotes to hero, technically mercenary, but it's basically hero in all but name, instead of swordmaster. Normally this would be a bad thing, since being one weapon locked in Thracia isn't terrible and swordmasters get adept, but being able to use axes is a solid niche that she has. And unlike swordmasters, she gets +2 con on promotion. And if you're using her in the very, very long term, getting a 10% support from Sed is also nice. Machyua is not the best sword fighter in this game, but a lot of Fire Emblem fans enjoy female heroes, and she's your only option for one here. Brighton is a weird unit. He's an Axe Knight, but he joins during the Monster Escape arc, which is 3 straight indoor maps. This means he can't use his mount or his preferred weapon type until Chapter 6. Until that point, he's a glorified Myrmidon. The Axe Knight / Great Knight class is supposed to be the tank of the cavalry types, and his starting Wrath skill implies that Brighton is meant to fill that role, walking onto the front lines with high defense, taking enemies' hits and hitting back hard. And while he does have a good by Thracia standards 35% defense growth and +2 defense on promotion, at base he's only barely tankier than Machyua is. Getting a 10% support from her is admittedly pretty nice and can help a bit during the escape arc. But Brighton doesn't come into his own until after the arc, and by that point you generally have better tanks. Wrath is a good skill, but overall Brighton is not great, not terrible, just okay.
I can't carry heavy weapons like most people here can.
Lara, she thief. She thief if you don't have Lifis. She thief while Lifis thiefs other things if you do have him. Her terrible starting con makes her awful at stealing weapons, but she can at least swipe items and use lockpicks, and often that's all you need. Her combat is also pretty atrocious with 0 base strength and only a 10% growth, and E-rank swords. All the speed in the world won't help when you can't damage things. But she doesn't need to. In fact, it's common to give her no weapon at all and use her as capture bait for enemies. Just make sure you don't lose her lockpicks this way. Now, Lara is unique, and in fact so unique I'm going to give her a second bio later in the game. Let's just say that you want to keep her alive and deploy her in Chapter 12X. It's very worth it. Fergus is a character I like quite a lot. So he's a sword knight, or free knight in Japanese. The class is essentially a mounted mercenary, and its gimmick is that it fights better dismounted than any other mounted class, losing slightly less stats when doing so. Notably, their speed does not go down at all on dismounting. That combined with his 7 speed, good con, and starting C rank in swords, particularly great if you stole Shiva's Killing Edge earlier. Vigor Star, mutual 10% support with Karin, and wait, what's this? 5 times follow-up critical multiplier? Fergus tends to be one of your best fighters during the Monster Escape arc. And that in itself is his biggest asset, because whether you like it or not, a lot of experience is going to get funneled into him, and he tends to end this arc very far ahead of the rest of your army, giving him a stat lead that will carry him for a while. You'll also find a Brave Sword, and Fergus is likely to be the only one with B swords by that point, so he gets first dibs on this, which is also crazy. All that, and then in Chapter 6 he can mount up and become a great capture bot and mover. I should mention that Fergus technically has 2 personal weapons, but you don't get either of them until almost the end of the game, so they won't be factoring into this bio, but I'll just say that if you train him, he'll be great with those, right at the end. Boy was Leif lucky to have him as a cellmate.
I'm no weakling.
Like Brighton, Karin is another weird unit because she's the first Pegasus Knight we get and is very typical of Fire Emblem early Pegasus Knights. She has a lot of speed and luck. Unfortunately, we get her at the start of the monster escape arc, which means she can't actually be a Pegasus Knight until bits of Chapter 5 and all of Chapter 6. Until then, she's stuck being, like Brighton, a glorified Myrmidon, the term's a bit more apt in her case, but hey, at least she gets a mutual support with Fergus. The thing about Karin, though, is that once she does get back on her mount, she's still not that great at combat, at least not without massive Crusader Scroll abuse. I actually really like Thracia's approach to flyers, due to both this and the overall map design, including the fact that Thracia's enemies love ballistas. Flyers are more focused on utility in this game than on being combat juggernauts. And the game will even tutorialize this in Chapter 6. Karin is great for rescuing and ferrying people around the map, but she's not that good at fighting. Especially with her E-lances at base, she can't even use javelins. And I think Fire Emblem should design flyers like this more often. Joining Maureen from Tellius in the very rare category of recruitable bosses, it's Dalsin. He's the first Armor Knight you get, and likely your last, because the second is unrecruitable by sane people. And that brings with it all that you'd expect. Good bulk, decent strength, in Thracia's case, really good con, and also in Thracia's case, access to a great number of weapons on promotion, which is the main reason to promote him. Even if you don't want to, he can be an alright tank during the monster escape arc, especially if you brought over the Brave Axe on either Leif or Lifis, and he even gets a support bonus from Leif. He has no other unique assets though, no Vigor or Authority stars, only a ×1 critical multiplier, and only a 20% growth in defense and fairly average HP. I put him in a similar category to Brighton and Machyua, as characters who do their job during the escape arc and then are likely to be benched. Unless he procs his 2% move growth a lot, that's always funny.
Let me be of help to you. No matter the hardship, I'm ready.
It took us a while to get our first mage, and he's even missable, but boy was he worth the wait. Asbel often ranks high in discussions of best early game mage in the series, and it's easy to see why. A Vigor star, 3 times follow critical multiplier, and a very strong, massive crit rate personal tome. And while sages get adept on promotion anyway, Asbel has it even as a mage. But speaking of promotion, oh boy, look at those promo gains! +5 magic, +5 skill, +6 speed, in a game where stats cap at 20. If anybody is still unsure about promoting at level 10, Asbel should convince them otherwise. He does not require 10 extra levels to have all the stats he'll ever need. Oh, and also promoting gives him access to staves in a game where staves are broken. He only starts at D, but still. On top of all this, his joining conditions are a perfect storm because the said scroll comes in the same chapter you get him, and it's often recommended you give him this as it will put his speed growth above 100%. Then you get a Master Seal very soon too, and he is a highly recommended first Master Seal candidate. This is because with his massive speed combined with Graph Caliper to crit things, Asbel is an incredible boss killer. He's in fact the only reliable answer to some bosses, especially the infamous Chapter 8X boss. What else? Oh right, Leif also supports him, in case Asbel needed even more crit. I love wind mages in Yggdrasil so much.
When I feel my courage falter, I remember you are at my side. That makes even the fiercest battlefield bearable.
Finally, Nanna has returned to us. And just like Leif, she's a character who might not look that strong on paper, but makes up for it with a bunch of incredible abilities and a personal weapon. They were truly made for each other. Now you might be thinking Nanna is amazing because she uses staves, and weirdly no, she only starts with an E rank, and she's fairly prone to missing early on. She'll get good at using them eventually, but her more immediate assets are having support with a lot of great characters, particularly Finn and Leif, the Leif one being mutual, which also stack with the Charm skill, which gives Hit and Avoid plus 10 to all allies within 3 spaces of her. Then there's her personal weapon, the Earth Sword, or Land Sword, I think it's canonically called in Heroes. Like Leif, it's a 1 to 2 range light magic sword, but unlike Leif, it casts Nosferatu, draining HP equal to damage dealt, even at 1 range when it's not using magic. A fun combo is to give Nanna the Wrath skill, which you'll get a manual for very soon. Then watch as, on enemy phase, Nanna takes a hit, then crits and gets all her health back, making her nearly invincible. As long as the sword lasts anyway, but there's always Hammer uses. Statistically, Nanna doesn't start that great, with middling offensive stats and low-ish defensive ones. And her growths are pretty mediocre apart from luck, but she's a great candidate for Crusader Scrolls, due to her incredible support abilities, access to good staves later, and the Wrath Earth Sword combo. She promotes to Paladin, oddly enough, but female Paladins in Yggdrasil use swords and staves. Getting plus 3 magic is nice. Now remember when I said back in Eyvel's bio that you might want to save the Flame Sword for later? Well, once Nanna gets access to that, she can equip it for plus 10 magic, and make her staves even better. That'll ruin the Wrath tanking combo though. Overall, just like Leif, Nanna is far more than meets the eye. Hicks sure is a person who exists. Since he joins in the same chapter Brighton is able to mount, it's hard not to compare them as they're both Axe Knights. Brighton has Wrath, Hicks has no skills, but he does have a 2x follow-up critical modifier to Brighton's 1. He also gets supported by Leif for some reason, and has higher bulk than Brighton at base, and more HP growth though less defense growth. His main asset is his massive con, which lets him use most axes without being weighed down. This helps because the halberd he joins with is one of the heaviest weapons in the game, and it's going to be useful against the cavalier reinforcements we'll be facing here and in Chapter 7. If it hits, and that's a big if sometimes. He's essentially a free deploy for Chapter 6 at least, and he can help out a bit. And, that's it. Yeah, this guy exists. I wonder what place he came in Choose Your Legends. Huh, he was in the bottom 40, but he beat out some characters that I personally find more memorable, including Dalsin. Shiva is pretty much your standard Myrmidon with a bit more tankiness thanks to the Soul skill. 30% defense and 70% strength aren't bad bulk growths for one either. And he has a decent 7 con and 20% growth for an on-foot sword user. Right now, he's decently fast and should be able to double and kill many things with his 4x follow-up critical modifier, and he even has a Vigor Star. On promotion, he'll pick up Adept for potentially even more hits. Shiva's main weaknesses are that he does take a bit of investment to get going, but it's somewhat well spent. He's definitely great when trained up, and that he only has a support with Safy of all people. He certainly won't replace Eyvel anytime soon, but if you want a Swordmaster, Shiva is not a bad candidate. Carrion is a controversial character. On the plus side, he's one of the few mounted units who can use both swords and lances while on horseback. He has a Vigor Star and a 4x follow-up critical modifier, a support with Leif that works well with this, and good growths. On the minus side, he's at level 1 with low stats for this point and terrible starting weapon ranks. So it takes a while for him to get good, and that's not great in a game where most strong characters are either good out of the gate or have something special that makes them easy to train. Now, Carrion kind of has this. In Chapter 9, he can talk with another character to receive a sword that gives the Paragon skill, doubling experience. But this has the same problem that Halvan's Brave Axe does. It's not exclusive to him. In other words, you could also use it to snowball any other sword user. He also has no skills. But as training projects go, you could do far worse than Carrion, as we'll see in a few chapters. Selphina is a bow knight, and they're kind of unique among cavalry in Thracia in that they get to keep their weapon of choice while dismounted, though they'll still have one less movement compared to a sniper. While bow-locked units still have the same issue of being unable to capture, Selphina does have a few unique assets. She starts at only 2 levels off promotion with reasonable stats and a Master Seal already in her inventory. She starts with a good variety of supports, including bestowing one of the only 20% support bonuses in the game, has the Accost skill, which can be fun against foes who can't counterattack, though her very low base HP gets in the way of its activation. She has a respectable starting B rank in bows, and in a later chapter she'll have a conversation that gives her a brave bow. If you haven't been training any other bow users, she's likely to be the only one in your army who can use this at the time, and it's a very, very strong weapon. Her main weakness aside from being bow-locked is mediocre growths, especially in HP, which also runs contrary to Accost. She also has no follow-up critical modifier or Vigor Stars, and she doesn't even have any authority when she really should. But overall, Selphina does have a lot of assets that make her useful, especially in this chapter where her killer bow can one-shot the enemy wyverns. I'm gonna cover Cain and Alva at the same time because they're sadly pretty interchangeable. These two might be the most forgettable Christmas cavaliers in the series. Well, for one thing, they're not even cavaliers. They're lance knights, meaning they can only use one weapon, whether mounted or dismounted, and they also compete with Finn, who joined way earlier and has a personal weapon. And they're also very underleveled compared to him. Their main gimmick is having good growths by Thracia standards. The problem is, that's really all they have, and Thracia is not a game kind to units like that. Sure, they will have high stats if they're trained up, but they have no follow-up critical modifier, no Vigor Stars, no authority, no personal weapon, no skills, and fairly minimal supports. Of the two, Cain leans more towards HP, strength, and defense, while Alva leans towards skill, speed, and despite being behind at base, con. They also have inverted weapon ranks with respects to swords and lances, except Alva starts so close to D lances that even this isn't much of a distinguishing feature. These two don't even get any lines unless they die, and that pretty much sums them up. If you're gonna train any of the Scrub Brigade, make it Robert. He at least has a 3x follow-up critical modifier and a Vigor Star. Compared to Selphina, he's a level 1 bow knight who starts at the very bottom of E rank in bows. But he does have excellent growths, and like I said, he is more rewarding to train than Cain and Alva thanks to his additional traits. Still no skills though. I actually used this guy in my very first playthrough of Thracia, so you can definitely make him work if you want to. Though it's certainly not necessary. Fred is the archetypal boring yet practical unit. He's a pre-promoted paladin with solid all-round stats, an A rank in swords, which is very significant, and a C rank in lances, and though he has no other notable traits like skills, a personal weapon, or any follow critical modifier, vigor, or authority, his stats and sword rank are enough to make him a good fighter with no investments. If you do invest in him, he has an oddly high strength growth though. And getting a support from Olwen can be decent, though she doesn't want to be too close to the front lines. If you ever have a deployment slot to spare, Fred's a good choice to fill it.
I would like to fight on the side of good, for as long as goodness will have me.
In contrast to Fred, Olwen is an extremely unique unit. She's a pre-promoted mage knight, the only horseback tome-using class in this game, which can also use swords. Olwen is one of only 2 playable mage knights that matter, and you can only have one or the other in your army, so the class alone is one of her main assets, and having mounted capturing ability combined with hitting on resistance is really, really nice. Especially when combined with Olwen's signature weapon, Dire Thunder. This is a brave thunder tome, and there aren't a lot of enemies that won't be one-rounded by this if it hits twice. If it hits twice. Here's where one of Olwen's weaknesses comes into play. Her base skill is not super high, and being a Thunder Tome, Dire Thunder's hit rate is not perfect. And with Olwen's low HP and defense, and Dire Thunder's massive weight guaranteeing she'll be at 0 attack speed with it until she gains a lot of speed, mean that if she misses one of her Dire Thunder shots and the enemy can counterattack, she is likely to get doubled and killed. If she can level up and raise her skill and bulk, this becomes less of an issue, and that's where big weakness number 2 comes into play. Olwen is effectively both a growth unit and a pre-promote, which is a paradoxical combo because she won't be getting much experience from the unpromoted enemies at this point. All that being said, Dire Thunder is completely insane when it does hit both times, and her starting Thunder rank means it's not too hard to get her to A for bolting, which is great for sniping troublesome ballistas, and we'll be seeing a lot of those coming up. Those of you who played Thracia might notice that I'm leaving something out of this bio. Olwen does have a second personal weapon, but it doesn't come until very, very late in the game, chapter 22 to be specific, and so I don't think it's relevant to overall discussions of her as a unit. Olwen has some significant strengths, you'll just have to keep her significant weaknesses in mind. But there's one other thing I should mention about Olwen right now. If you take the A route split in chapter 15, there is a character exclusive to that route who only joins if Olwen is not recruited or dead. Weirdly, there is no in-story reason for this, and recruiting Olwen but letting her get captured won't work. This character is debatably a better unit than Olwen for a number of reasons that I'll get to once he joins, but I just wanted to raise the issue now, because it's a choice you'll need to make if you plan on taking that path. Though myself and many others don't like going with this other character because Olwen has far more significance to the story.
I am the daughter of Eyvel, Mistress Saffiana. The enemy doesn't stand a chance.
Mareeta is finally on our side, and she has a shiny new, non-cursed sword. So, Mareeta's base stats apart from speed might not look that impressive, especially her 3 base strength. But she comes with an 11 might, 20 crit, 60 use, brave personal weapon. And she has a 5 times follow-up critical modifier, so if she's doubling with it, and she likely will be, you're looking at 4 attacks with 2 of them being near guaranteed crits. Oh, and though its odds are unreliable early on, she also has Luna for good measure. She starts at level 2, but this is a bit of a blessing in disguise as it means that she'll be leveling up extremely quickly, and she is still very capable of one-rounding enemies even at level 2. And once she starts leveling up, she'll reap the benefit of some of the best growth rates in the game. 60% strength, 75% skill, 80% speed, 60% luck. She is a little on the fragile side, but Mareeta's more somebody that you just point at an enemy that you want to die. Like mother, like daughter, I guess. But wait, there's more! Not only does she have some incredibly good support that you won't benefit from until very late in the game, she also has a Vigor Star, and...
I'm constantly honing my skill. Keep me with you, and I promise you won't regret it.
I need to give her a second page of her bio, because on promotion she'll gain the Adept skill, and in chapter 15, there's an event that will give her the Astra skill. And in Thracia, Astra and Luna can activate at the same time. If you like Swordmasters, Mareeta is a lot of fun.
I do not yet fully understand you, but for now, I will join you. I do not have much choice, do I?
Not only is Salem the only playable Loptrian mage in the game, he's also the very first playable character in the series to use dark magic. Which isn't as good as it sounds. Aww. Dark tomes are stupidly heavy, you can only get them by capturing enemy Loptrian mages, and your version of Jormungand does not inflict poison. Salem is therefore probably better served using wind, fire, and thunder magic, but he's even better served using staves. He's one of the few mages to use staves even unpromoted, and a starting rank of C isn't bad. And promoting gives him 50 staff experience, enough for an extra rank. So he'll be using everything but warp in no time, and he can get to warp decently quickly if you like using staves, which this is Thracia, you should. Sadly, he doesn't get the ridiculous Sage promotion bonuses, but he gets an interesting +4 to defense. No skills, vigor, or follow-up critical modifier either, but Salem's staff utility more than makes up for it.
I'll dance as long as it helps keep everyone's spirits up.
Lara can now dance, which she has in the form of a skill. Choose this to let any adjacent ally act again. Sadly, it got nerfed from genealogy where it affected all adjacent allies. It's important to note that every time Lara dances, she gets 1 fatigue, and her HP isn't very high. But it's also important to note that Lara has Steal as both a personal and a class skill, which means she keeps it as a dancer. This makes Lara the only character in the Fire Emblem franchise to have both Thief and Dancer utility at the same time. Lara can not only still steal things, though the chances of her actually doing this is very low with her terrible con, but perhaps more importantly, she can still use lockpicks as a dancer. Though you want her dancing most turns. Lara also has 1 Vigor Star, which means, if you're lucky, you can dance for 2 people in the same turn. Turning into a dancer counts as a promotion of sorts, though it does drop her stats even more significantly if she was previously a rogue, but it does mean that Lara is technically capable of leveling up more than anyone else in the game, by getting her to level 20 Thief, promoting to Rogue, getting her to level 20 Rogue, making her a dancer, and then as a dancer at level 10 or higher, she can use a Master Seal to go to Rogue again, and then level another 20 times. I don't recommend doing this because she'll lose the dance skill if she goes to Rogue, but it's a mechanic that exists, so I felt the need to mention it. But overall, Lara is Dancer out of 10, and that's already perfection. The one downside is getting a dancer means missing out on Lifis bullying.
I see you thinking, that Perne's no more than a thief. I would invite you to think again.
Move over, Lifis, because here comes the true master phantom thief of Yugdrall. Perne is a pre-promoted thief, so he has access to all the typical stealing utility that Lifis and Lara had. The difference is he has a lot more base speed, a bit more base con, and is also extremely good at combat in general, having a 5 times follow-up critical modifier, B rank in swords, and soul. If you're gonna stack scrolls on a thief to hopefully give them more con to go on a real thieving spree, Perne should be the one you do it on, especially since he also has 5 Vigor Stars. That means a 1 in 4 chance of acting again every turn. And that isn't even getting into the sword that he comes with. He's worth recruiting just for that, but everything else about him is also fantastic.
I'm telling you, Perne is just the worst! He even shoved a big, gross, squirmy caterpillar in my face!
Are you ready for Tiny Tina's Plunderlands? I've been wanting to make that reference for a while. Tina is another classic example of how units work in Thracia. On paper, she looks absolutely awful. No good stats except luck, 1 base skill in a game where staves can miss and skill affects that, and a base E rank in staves. How in the heck does she make up for all that? Well, it's not with her growths. Even though her magic, speed, and luck are good, the rest of her growths are terrible, and one of those is skill, which she wants. But she does have 5 Vigor Stars, so a 1 in 4 chance of acting twice in a turn. And 2 personal staves that don't care about her E rank. And I'll cover the least stupid of them first. Unlock lets her open any door or chest on the map. This can miss, but it's actually kind of a good thing, because if she misses, she won't consume a use and she gets 5 staff experience, and also a lot of regular experience to help her level up faster. It's also possible to get more of these. Chapter 20 has a few enemy unlock users you can capture. But Tina's best trick is her Thief Staff. If she has higher magic than the enemy, and it's easy to do this with help of the Ensorcel Staff or Pure Waters, She gets to pick anything she wants from their inventory and take it. No need to worry about the con weight issues thieves have when stealing. She gets whatever she wants. Yes, she can miss with this, and expect to miss a lot. But by this point, you have Dancer Lara, so you get at least 2 shots at it per turn, and if she misses, she still gets staff experience. And she also has 25% vigor, so you might get 3 shots at it per turn. But the sheer possibilities this opens up are staggering. You can steal incredibly rare and heavy weapons. You can steal ballistas and sell them for money. You can steal all of a boss's weapons and capture them effortlessly. Unlike Sleep, they forgot to make enemies on thrones and gates immune, and I'm almost positive this is an oversight, because wow is this broken. Wanna know how broken? With enough magic stacking and some other shenanigans, Tina can steal Raedric's Loptrian Fang. If she has one weakness, it is that she fatigues very easily, with her low base HP and her personal staves costing 5 fatigue. But you don't need to bring her every single map, just to the ones that she can break wide open in the most hilarious of ways. Yeah, Tina's great, and there's another reason why Chapter 12X is extremely lucrative for you. So after all those super interesting unit bios, we now have this guy who's just the definition of he's there and he's fine. Unlike Shiva and Mareeta, Troude only has a 1x follow-up critical modifier, though he does have a Vigor Star. His main asset is being a little bit bulkier than either of those at base, having a 90% HP growth, and the Nile skill. This negates the enemy's skills during combat, which is situationally okay against certain bosses. Though literally just when I'm making this bio I realise this makes him pretty good at fighting berserkers since it'll get rid of their wrath. At least I think it gets rid of wrath. You can tell I don't use this guy much. On promotion he'll pick up Adept like all Swordmasters. And he starts only 2 levels away from this. A starting B rank in swords is pretty good, as is a 10% support from Perne. Troude often gets lost in the crowd of the other 12X joiners, but he's perfectly fine if you want to use him. Glade has an authority star, and he's worth deploying just for that. Even though from this point we'll be facing a lot of bosses with authority stars, think of each one you have as cancelling 1 star the enemy has. Other than that, he's a pre-promoted Duke Knight with pretty solid stats and an A rank in Lances. He doesn't have Finn's Brave Lance, but he can still do decent mounted combat. Dismounted though, he's stuck with underwhelming combat and an E rank in swords, so deploying him in indoor maps is really just for his authority star. He also supports the entire Scrub Brigade if you want to use them, but more notably, he gets one of the rare 20% support bonuses in the game from his wife Selphina, and an extra 20 to hit, avoid, and critical is nothing to sneeze at. Truly the greatest Fire Emblem units of all time! Our wall of genericness is unstoppable! In all seriousness, these 5 are essentially playable green units. Their stats vary wildly. I've shown here their minimum and maximum stats and everything. They each only come with a single iron weapon. And a lot of people like to dump their items because you will lose these 5 at the end of the chapter regardless of if they survive, and all their items will be gone with them. There's also no reward for keeping them all alive, so they are entirely expendable, and there's a few things you can do with that. You can either use them to wall off the city, though Glade does a perfect job of defending it on his own. You can have them break to the west and try and take out some of the ballistas before your army arrives. I tend to find that they get killed by the ballistas before they get the chance to do that though. Or you can have them charge right at list and see if they can do some damage. Oh, and though they can gain experience, they can't gain stats on level ups. These 5 are likely to see combat regardless of how you play the chapter, which debatably makes them better than some characters in this game. Fun fact, Dean is actually the first male playable flyer in the series, and looking at this bio, you can definitely see where Ha gets it from. So he's a pre-promoted Draco Knight with pretty insane base stats, though a lot of his defense comes from his mount, an A rank in Lancers, a 3 times follow-up critical modifier, and 2 Vigor Stars. Dean is the only flyer in Thracia who actually can be a combat juggernaut without scroll abuse. But he's still reined in by the existence of ballistas and indoor maps. However, Dean is actually still very good indoors because he has an A rank in swords. He's got good supports too, including receiving a coveted 20% support from Linoan. Though this has one issue that I'll cover once she properly joins. And his growths are pretty good too. So yeah, Dean's ridiculous in every way. Surely Kaga wouldn't also give him a really strong brave personal weapon. Oh wait, he did! The hilarious thing about the Dragon Pike is that actually getting it is fairly difficult. Dean needs to visit one specific house that's out of the way in Chapter 14, but many players consider Dean so good in all other respects that it's not a big loss if you miss this. What more can I say? Edda joins as an unpromoted Draco rider in the same chapter her brother Dean does, and compared to him it's not looking so great. You'd think that starting weaker means she ends up stronger, but she actually has worse growths than him in everything but magic and speed, and worse weapon ranks, FCM, Vigor Stars, and supports. Here's the thing though. She might look bad compared to Dean, but this doesn't make her a bad unit, and that's something a lot of people forget. As I said in Karin's bio, flyers in Thracia are more about utility than combat, and Edda provides that in spades, and can be deployed alongside Karin and Dean to give you triple the flyer utility. Her starting B in Lancers also lets her use Rider's Banes and Killer Lancers, so she can still contribute in combat. So Edda's someone actually pretty good who only looks bad compared to an overachieving brother. I guess she's the Hilda of Draco Knights. Thracia has some of the best designed growth units in all of Fire Emblem, and Homer is the first on that list. Homer is a bard, not the dancer adjacent ones from later games. He's Lewin's class from Genealogy, effectively a mage that also gets light tomes. He starts underleveled, but his base stats aren't that bad, and being a magic unit who joins in a chapter full of armor knights you can easily choke point off, he's not that hard to train. Especially since he has Paragon, doubling his experience. And he's very worth training, not just for his ridiculous growth rates, but because he promotes to Sage, with all the staff rank and bonkers promotion gains that entails. Plus something a little extra, Homer gets 2 ranks in light magic on promotion, putting him up to B, enough for the Nosferatu tome you get in Chapter 14. With his ridiculous stats and Nosferatu, Homer can be almost invincible on the front lines. Oh wait, I didn't even mention he has a 5 times follow-up critical modifier. The fact I forgot that really says something. Overall, Homer is a character I recommend everybody who plays Thracia train at least once. Trust me, it's an incredibly fun experience. 2 good mage growth units in a row? It's more likely than you think. Linoan is similar to Homer in a lot of ways, being an underleveled magic user who is nonetheless easy to train, who has a 5 times follow-up critical modifier and the ridiculous Sage promotion. The difference is that while Homer's ease of use comes from Paragon, Linoan's comes from the fact that she can use staves in her base class, and starts with a C rank and some great utility staves already in her inventory. Not only can she spam these to get experience, but it also means that she's a fantastic support unit with no investment. She just happens to turn into a great combat unit if you do invest in her. With her B rank in Light, she can also use the Nosferatu tome from Chapter 14 at base. I'd also recommend just giving her a tome in general so she doesn't get one-tap captured. There's just one caveat with this. Linoan does not promote with a Master Seal. She can only promote by visiting the church in Chapter 21, and she has to be the one to do this first. If anyone visits the church before her, she'll be locked out of promoting. Now this is both a good and a bad thing. You don't need to spend a Master Seal on her, but you also can't promote her earlier than Chapter 21. And she'd benefit a lot from an early promotion. Master Seals aren't exactly a scarce resource either. Another caveat with Lenoan is that if she ever dies or is captured, Dean will leave her army, so she'll deprive you of 2 good units that way. Whether you use her as a staff bot or an investment sage, Lenoan is great. Just keep that promotion issue in mind. Ralph might be the most generic looking Fire Emblem character of all time, but he's actually not bad. His base stats are enough to do good combat, and A swords and C axes with 40 weapon experience means he's only 10 weapon experience away from using anything he wants, since there are no A-ranked axes. His growths, besides decent con, kinda suck, but you have plenty of Crusader scrolls at this point. He may have no skills, no FCM and vigor, and interestingly, no supports at all. That's gonna get more common from here on. But Ralph has the stats at base to be a decent combat unit, whether as a main member of a team, or as a substitute in case someone's fatigued.
I do not wish to speak of my grandfather. I despise that man.
Oh, you thought Homer and Lenoan were the crazy mage growth units of this game? You poor babies. Let me show you what real power looks like. To get the negatives out of the way, Sarah has an FCM of 0, meaning she cannot critical at all on follow-up attacks. Her HP is also very low, and being a staff user with a high staff rank, it means she'll fatigue fast. But apart from that, Sarah is a cleric, only 3 levels off promotion, with Paragon and B-rank staves. She's an incredible support staffer right off the bat, especially as her bases aren't even that low. Her skill in particular starts above 10, so she'll never miss with staves. But she has no trouble getting promoted, which will put her at A staves. The hilarious thing is, her ridiculous magic skill and speed growth rates don't even matter, because with her bases and promotion gains, she's gonna be capped or near capped in those stats with only the bare minimum of leveling. After this, you might want to use scrolls to boost her luck growth to give more reliable miracle. Sarah's HP and defense are low enough that it's a good insurance to have. With her high stats on promotion and A staves, Sarah is likely the first candidate for offensive rewarping, letting her assassinate priority targets wherever they are on the map. Oh, and she has a 25% vigor rate, excellent for both offense and staff usage. Fatigue is definitely a problem though. If you are using Sarah offensively, expect to run through a lot of stamina drinks. But that might be worth it. Also, Sarah is the one person able to cure petrification. But that won't come into play until the last 2 chapters. Joining Oliver in the rare ranks of intentional joke characters in Fire Emblem is Shanam. His base stats are literally just the generic Swordmaster class bases with 1 point of luck added. And his growths look like they could be a placeholder. His bases are actually objectively worse than Shiva at his join time in Chapter 7. C rank in swords is awful for a swordmaster. He has no vigor or authority, nobody supports him, fitting, and especially holding him back as a swordmaster is his 0 follow-up critical modifier. Really, the one good thing about this guy is his bargain skill, which lets him buy from shops at half price. This is somewhat useful for the secret shop towards the end of the game, which sells stat boosters. Even with this, they're still 4,000 gold each. Apart from that, most armories and vendors from this point don't stock anything hugely useful. Other than that, his main use is scroll abusing him into a god for pure bragging rights.
No matter how low I fall, I will never forsake the pride of Ulster.
Why, Kaga? You were doing so well with the growth units, and now this! So, Miranda. Her main claim to fame is she's a mage who promotes into Mage Knight rather than Sage. Now, if this was genealogy, she'd probably be amazing. But here, Sage has ridiculous promotion gains and staves, while Mage Knight has to dismount indoors, and from here on, we'll be encountering a lot of indoor maps. You wanna know the really sad part? Dismounted Mage Knight has less movement than unpromoted Mage, making Miranda a sad case of someone who arguably gets worse on promotion. She also has no follow-up critical modifier or vigor in a game where every other mage is great at either or both of those things, and trash weapon ranks. She gives a 20% support bonus to an exclusive character for the B route, so that's something. Other than that, yeah, she has good magic and speed growths. And Wrath, I suppose that's something if she can actually survive a round of combat on the enemy phase. Seriously, why are you in Heroes and, as of recording this video, Lenoan isn't? That confuses me to no end.
How I resent you!
The elephant in the room is that Ilios requires Olwen to be not recruited or dead. In exchange for giving up Dire Thunder, what do you get? Well, pretty solid base stats, including better strength than Olwen will likely achieve, Miracle and Soul to make him pretty survivable, some solid all-round growths, a Vigor Star, A-ranks in Thunder and Swords are really nice, no supports is a bit of a bummer. Also, Ilios comes with some really nice items, bolting, a Master Sword, and the Soul Manual. And being a mounted unit, it's a little annoying to get these if you can't recruit him. So, I like to give him credit for them. Ilios is very helpful in 16A for taking out ballistas with bolting, and he'll be a solid option from then on. With his good strength and A in Swords and Thunder, he's more versatile than Olwen while dismounted. A choice you'll have to weigh up if you want to go the A route. Sleuth starts with A staves and more than 10 skill. He also has 15% vigor. That's pretty much all you need to know about him, but that alone makes him extremely good and one of the main reasons to play the A route. He can use warp instantly, and while rewarp might seem a bit weird, it does have a niche in teleporting him onto reinforcement spawn points in Chapter 18. I may be speaking from experience there. You also need him to recruit one of the A-Route exclusive characters later on, so keep him around for that. And that's about it. A-Starv's good. Misha is in a very weird position, and I will admit I don't often take the A-Route or use her, so I can't really speak to how she works. But the main issue is that she is a pre-promoted flyer at around the point where flyers stop being all that useful. And even when they are, Karin, Dean, and Edda combined is usually enough. That said, she has a really good base magic and starts with the Wind Sword, so she can put out some good offense with that while also tanking enemy mages. She has decent offensive growths, a support with Karin, 2x follow-up critical modifier, and a Vigor Star. She'd likely be really good if she joined just a little earlier. She's just gonna have to dismount a lot going forward, and that hurts a bit. And for such a difficult recruitment, I've always found that a bit disappointing. After all that, one question remains. Is Xavier worth it? And the answer is... kinda? Firstly, he has an Authority Star, making him always worth deploying if you have a free slot. He also has an interesting assortment of skills. Wrath lets him take hits and hit back hard. A Cost can be a double-edged sword, especially against long-range tomes. But it works decently with bows and gets around Xavier's 0x follow-up critical modifier, which I'll go into later. But most notable is Pervise, as Xavier is the only recruitable character to have this. Dalsin doesn't get it on promotion. Xavier uses a good variety of weapons, and has A ranks in axes and bows. The bow rank is interesting, letting him use Selphina's Brave Bow along with Master Bows to great effect with the Accost skill. While 6 speed might not look like much, his con is high enough to not be weighed down by most bows, and Thracia enemies are quite slow even later on. So that's 0 follow-up critical modifier. This isn't as bad as it sounds, as Xavier's not going to be conventionally doubling many things, but a cost doesn't count as doubling, it counts as a new round of combat, treating your attack as the first again, meaning he'll still have a critical rate. He's very physically bulky on his base stats alone, and if you train him, he'll eventually be bulky on the magic side too, because, now this might be an oversight, Xavier has the exact same growths as Ilios, and he's not the only character with this distinction. Also notable, Xavier is one of only 2 people, the other being a promoted Dalsin, who can use lances indoors, but he starts with an E rank, so good luck getting him to use good ones. Overall, Xavier's more likely to be kept around as a trophy rather than an army mainstay, but he's certainly not bad, and he has a lot of good uses. Connemore is the B-Route exclusive recruitment of Chapter 19, though it's important to note that both him and his counterpart have an Authority Star, a 2x follow-up critical modifier, and a Vigor Star. So regardless of which you get, you won't lose out in any of those departments. Of the two, Connemore serves a more offensive role, having A ranks in lances and swords, able to use both while mounted as a paladin, and having some pretty solid stats including a very high skill base, and good growths in strength and speed. What is it with all the pre-promote paladins having good strength growths? He has the Accost skill, and he'll be triggering this often due to his high HP and decent speed and con. But say it with me, Accost can be a double-edged sword sometimes. He also gets one of the rare 20% supports in the game, from Miranda. Well, I guess if you're using her, that's something. Amalda is the A-Route exclusive character from Chapter 19, and she's usually preferred for the simple fact that she's a staffer. C-Staffs might not be as high as somebody like Sleuth, but that does let her use the Sleep Staff at base, along with some other useful utilities. And her A rank in swords lets her use the Flame Sword's +5 magic to aid her staffing. That plus Ensorcel or Pure Water, and she can put in a lot of work. Also helps that Nanna isn't likely to hit C-Staffs for a while, even if you're using her. Though Amalda's strength might seem low, that A in swords lets her put in more work offensively than you might think, combined with her 2x follow-up critical modifier. One of her only drawbacks is lacking any supports whatsoever. Oh, and one more thing to note, and this also applies to Connemore. The pair of them have one more point of move than the average promoted mounted units. Diarmid's stats might seem a little low for a pre-promote joining this late, but like his sister, he makes up for it in other ways. One of which is exactly like her. He's another user of the Charm skill, and yes, this can stack with Nanna and the Kingmaker, letting you give people in an area +30 to hit and avoid. Your own mini Sias, I guess. He's also got a 5x follow-up critical modifier, just like Fergus. A mutual support with Nanna is great, as is his starting A rank in swords. Speaking of swords, he has a personal one, though not quite. The Bayo Blade is usable by only Diarmid and Fergus, and that raises certain implications, but those aren't relevant here. All you need to know is this is a very strong, high crit sword with 60 uses. And Diarmid will wreck enemies with this with his 5x follow-up critical modifier. It also has the bizarre effect of giving the Vantage and Wrath skills. In practice, since Wrath and Vantage don't stack, only the Vantage part will be active, but if you somehow fight an enemy with Vantage, Wrath will work. In that one very specific circumstance. Something tells me this weapon was designed before the development team nerfed the Vantage-Wrath combo. Whether you give this to Diarmid or Fergus depends on which one you want as your primary combat unit. In my experience, a well-trained Fergus won't need this to one-round most enemies, whereas Diarmid could use the boost. Regardless, if you have a spare slot, you want to deploy this guy for his charm skill.
It's all going to plan.
The Master Tactician, the Bishop of Flame, bearer of many titles, and he's finally ours, and he's the biggest tease of all time. Firstly, he doesn't keep his 10 authority stars as a playable unit. No, he only has 3. And just to tease you further, he has more in Chapter 23 itself than when he officially joins. Still, a 9% hit and avoid boost to your whole army is nothing to sneeze at, and he has 3 Vigor Stars and an A rank in Staves, essentially making him another Sleuth with way better stats. Speaking of stats, he has Near Cap Magic and can Nosferatu tank at base if you want to do that, but Sias is more for support than for offense. Because of this, his Nile skill rarely sees use, though there are some mini-bosses in the final chapter with dangerous skill combos that it might help against. The elephant in the room, and why I call this guy a giant tease, is that in order to keep Sias in your party, you have to refuse to recruit Sed. And a lot of people won't want to do that, given that, well, that's Ced we're talking about. However, I've sometimes seen it described like this. If you are confident that you have enough combat units to take on the end of the game, it may be better to choose Syas for his support abilities. Meanwhile, Ced is for if you think you really need an extra fighter.
The hard road Prince Leif has been forced to march has also made him strong.
Ced is a sage with pretty good base stats, a 3x follow-up critical modifier, 2 Vigor Stars, an Authority Star, which he didn't even need, but they gave him one anyway, Adept, and A Staves. Am I forgetting something? Oh right! He also has a personal weapon that has 20 might, 30 crit, and gives plus 20 to skill and speed. Effectively plus 14 speed due to its weight, but still, Ced is someone who exceeds the stat caps by nearly double, as long as his personal tome lasts, and at 50 uses and only 2 or 3 chapters left in the game, it probably will. Point Ced at any enemy you want deleted, including bosses, and he'll get the job done. And that's when he doesn't need to use Warp, Rescue, Sleep, Silence, Berserk, any broken staves you want. Yes, Syas can do all the A-staff things too, but I give Ced one advantage here. His decent durability thanks to his tome, plus being good at combat, means that he can re-warp himself anywhere he wants, even close to enemies, while Syas needs to be more careful doing that. In my view, this gives Ced a little more mobility. Speaking of mobility, he has 8 move when he's not re-warping. If Ced has any weaknesses, they are that due to the lower stat thresholds of Thracia and some fairly strong late game enemies, he's not as unhittable as you might think, especially against master weapons. He has to decide between attacking or using staves in any turn, and choosing him means you lose Syas's 3 authority stars. So, Syas is perfect staff support that also buffs your army, while Ced is perfect staff support that also deletes enemies.
I won't be defeated.
I will act with honor. I pledge it on the House of Isaac. I must honor my debt.
What you see is what you get with Galzus. Nearly all combat stats capped, A in swords and axes, comes with a Master Sword and Master Axe, Astra and Luna, 3x follow-up critical modifier, and 5 Vigor Stars. Yeah, he's level capped, but he doesn't need to level up anyway, though if he could, he also has a copy of Olwen and Ilios and Xavier's growths for some reason. He also has an excellent support with Mareeta if you've been using her. 54 HP, 14 defense, and 9 magic backed up by the Flame Sword in his inventory make him one of the tankiest characters in the game at base, too. And that massive HP also means you're not likely to get him fatigued before endgame. If you recruited Galzus, and all it takes is Mareeta being alive, congratulations, you've got yourself one more free kill enemy button for endgame.
I hardly recognize Lord Leif these days. He's become quite the leader.
Eyvel is back, just in time for endgame, with the exact same stats she had when she left in Chapter 5. Back then they were impressive, but now her strength leaves a lot to be desired, and she might not one-round everything. Also, strong magical enemies do stand a decent chance of one-shotting her. And she's also vulnerable to status staves. That said, she still has cap speed, she'll be doubling a lot of things, she's got the adept skill of a swordmaster, and she can use any of the swords you've amassed over the course of the game. Her supports are as good as always, as is her authority star. She's worth deploying in endgame for that alone. Recruiting Eyvel back is mostly a sentimental thing, that and you have to do it for a max rank playthrough, but even this late, she still has ways to contribute.